Today's lesson is going to be on adding and subtracting mixed numbers. Many of the examples in this note sheet are from previous grade levels of math, but I will be talking about how to make these problems equivalent to a 7th grade level problem. First, please add the note sheet to the table of contents. So I just want to show you how many teachers and how Digits recommends adding these two mixed numbers and simplifying them. It is very complicated in my opinion and a lot of work, and I think this might be why a lot of people don't like adding fractions. So I'll be teaching you what I consider a much simpler and quicker method, but I do first want to show you what a lot of people do that I don't do. So first off, Digits shows that they're going to change the 1/2 into a common denominator with the 8 by multiplying by 8. Now, why they don't use 8 as the lowest common denominator, I don't know. But anyways, they're doing the method of you just multiply the denominators to find a common denominator. So then 6 7/8 would be multiplied by 2 to convert 7/8 into 14/16. Then what it recommends is changing the mixed number into improper. So they do 16 times 5 plus 8 to get 88 over 16, and then changing the 6 14/16 into improper by multiplying and then adding the numerator. So what's going to happen now is we do have a common denominator. So you're going to add 88 plus 110 and get 198 over 16. So we're dealing now with some relatively large numbers. They divide in order to change this back into a mixed number. And then the last step is going from simplifying 6 over 16 into 12 3/8. So that is a lot of work for what should be a much quicker problem. So what we're going to look at is a different way of doing this instead of changing the mixed numbers into improper fractions. So I have this visual to show you why this is a little quicker. First off, 2 is 2 whole, and then we have 3 pieces out of 4, plus 1 whole and 3/4. So visually, that's what it looks like. What we have then is we have 3 whole because we have 2 plus 1, which equals 3. So that's just showing you we have 2 plus the 1 equaling 3. Then we're going to add our fractions. We have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, 5/4, 6/4. Because 3 plus 3 is 6, we would get 6/4. Now I'm going to simplify that right away because I see they're both even. And 6 becomes 3 and 4 becomes 2. So 3/2 is equivalent to 1/2. So what we have is 3 whole plus 1/2 more. So 1 plus 3 is 4/2. So if we move this little piece over here, we'll notice we have 4 whole plus 1/2. So much quicker than the example I showed before. This one I pre-did on your notes. I wrote it as 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, 5/4, 6/4 to show where this comes from. So I would recommend highlighting the 1, 2, and 3 here, the same color to show that that's where the 3 is coming from. And then I would highlight the fourths a different color to kind of show where that's coming from. So now you try number 1. Please try this problem. You have 15 9/10 plus 3 1/2. So pause the video, use pencil, try the problem, and then see how you do. So I recommend first that you add the whole numbers. You have 15 plus 3, you're going to get 18. And then we need to add the fractions. This time we need a common denominator though. And the last one, it was already a common denominator of 4. But here we're going to need to change the 1/2 into tenths if we're going to use the lowest common denominator. So that will be 9 plus 5, because we have now 9/10 and 5/10, which is 14/10. Those are both even, so I'm going to simplify them. I'm going to change 7/5 into 1 2/5 because 5 goes into 7 one whole time. 7 minus 5 is 2 left over. So we have 18 plus 1 2/5, which is a final answer of 19 2/5. Now, to make this problem a 7th grade level problem, what we would do is we would have positive and negatives on them. In this case, I'm making them both negative. So if we had negative 15 and 9/10 plus negative 3.5, then all that would change is a negative final answer. So before I added those negatives, it's technically a 5th grade level problem. And now when I add the negatives, it has become a 7th grade level problem. Example 2 on the inside left top of your notes, we have 2 minus 1/3. This green box up here is going to be for the traditional method, but I'm going to show you a different method before we do the traditional method. So first off, 2 is equal to 2 whole. Now, if we want to take a third away from 2 whole, we're going to need to chop up one of these pieces into thirds. So if I change this piece into thirds, that means I've changed this into 1 whole and 3 thirds, because 1 plus 3 over 3 is the same as 1 plus 1, which is 2. So I've just taken one of the whole pieces and chopped it into thirds. Now, I can subtract a third from that quite easily because we can cancel one out here. We have a common denominator, and 3 minus 1 is 2. So therefore, there's 1 whole left and 1 2/3. And the answer is 1 2/3. Now, the traditional method that a lot of teachers teach is that you take the whole number 2 over 1 and you change it to a common denominator with whatever you're subtracting. So in this case, we're going to multiply by 3 over 3 to change the denominator into a 3. So 2 over 1 is equal to 6 divided by 3. Now we can subtract 1/3, which will give us 5/3, and then we would have to change that back into a mixed number. Here's the pre-written example 2 showing I would highlight the 2 and the 1 plus 3 over 3 to show that those are equal. And you could highlight, I guess, these if you wanted to. I would also make sure you're crossing off, maybe with highlighter, the 3 over 3, because you're taking away one of them. So if you have 2 colored highlighters, I'd cross that out and I'd highlight this minus 1/3 the same color. I've also written in the traditional method and shown that. There are a lot of people who will use the traditional method on this type of problem, and that's totally fine. So here's a you try for you to try. 8 minus 5/6. Please pause the video and try it if you haven't already. So using the method I just showed you, we would change 8 into 7 plus 6/6. I'm using 6/6 because we have a common denominator if I do that. 6 divided by 6 is 1. 1 plus 7 is 8. So all I've done is I've taken one piece, one whole, that is, and split it into 6. Now I can subtract 5/6 from that. So we'll get 7 and 1/6 because 6 minus 5 is 1. The denominator stays the same, and we're left with 7. Now, if you don't understand that, you could do the traditional method, which is convert 8 over 1 into a common denominator with 6. So 8 times 6 is 48, 6 times 1 is 6, and then we subtract 5/6, which is 43 over 6, and then you have to divide back. And remember, you're not supposed to be using calculators on this topic, so this is less computation than having to convert this back and multiply and everything. So this method is simpler without a calculator, in my opinion, but use whatever method you feel the most comfortable with. If we're changing this into a 7th grade level problem, the 8 could be a negative and the 5/6 could be a positive. Because these are now different signs, you would still subtract and it would make the final answer a negative 7 and 1/6. So you don't have to change the problem into a 7th grade level problem on your notes if you don't want to, but I do want you to understand that that's the only difference. That's what makes it 7th grade level. Here's another you try. Please try 5 3/4 minus 4 5/8. So hopefully you've tried it, and here is my recommendation. First, we're going to do 5 minus 4. That gives you 1 whole. And then we're going to do 3/4 minus 5/8. So what we've done so far is we've taken the whole numbers and subtracted them. And now we're taking the fractions and we're subtracting them. So we do need a common denominator. Therefore, I'm going to change this one into eighths. 6/8 minus 5/8 will be 1/8. And therefore, we have 1 whole and 1/8. And if this went too fast, please rewind and watch the video again. Here's the traditional method for you try number 3. So if you didn't like the method I showed you, you could do what most teachers teach, which is you change this one into improper, you change this one into improper, and then now you have to have a common denominator. So this fraction needs to change into eighths. So we're going to have 46 eighths minus 37 eighths, which is 9 eighths. And then you change that back to a mixed number. Because if you start with a mixed number, you need to end with a mixed number. Or a proper fraction, you shouldn't end with an improper fraction. Okay, example 3. This is 2 1/5 minus 2/5, which should already be written for you on your note sheet. So you're going to have 2 1/5 minus 2/5. Therefore, we need to chop this one up into fifths because right now we only have 1/5. We can't subtract 2 from one piece. So we need more pieces. So essentially, we have one whole. The 2 has been split into 1. This one has been changed into 5/5. I changed it into 5 because I need a common denominator plus this 1/5 more. So what we're doing is we're going to be taking 2/5 away from all this. So essentially, we had 6/5, okay, because we chopped this up, minus 2, which is 4. And we're left with 1 whole. Now, if that confused you, you can just do the traditional method, which is change this one into an improper fraction, subtract 2/5, you'll get 9/5, and therefore that can be rewritten as a mixed number, and you're done. So on this one, the traditional might feel quicker, which I think it is, and sometimes the traditional method makes the most sense. So here's the pre-done notes. I showed the step where 5/5 plus the 1/5 is actually equal to 6/5. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Minus the 2 is the 4/5 that's left over. And you have also 1 whole. And I would recommend, if you didn't already, you crossed out 2/5 to show that minus 2/5 part. You try number 4. Please fill in a 3. So we have 10 3/7 minus 6 4/7. Pause it and try it if you haven't already. So 10 3/7 minus 6 4/7. This is a different method than the one before. You could subtract the whole numbers and get 4. And then if you do 3 minus 4, because the denominator is already the same, you're going to get a negative 1/7. So the answer is not 4 1/7. You have to take away a 1/7 from the 4. So 4 minus 1/7 is the same thing as 3 plus 7/7. Then subtract 1/7 and you get 3 6/7. Now, if that method is not making sense to you, and there's many people that it's not going to make sense to, then you can do the traditional method. So the traditional method, I'm realizing this probably needs to get changed. I'll change that later. Oh, there it is. We're going to use, change this to an improper fraction minus another improper fraction now. And then you'll have to convert, after you've subtracted the numerators, convert the improper fraction back to a mixed number. And then last but not least, you try number 5. Please pause and try it if you haven't already. So we have adding our whole numbers. -5 and a -6 means we add, so it's -11. 1/2 plus 7/8 is going to be the same as from here to here. You're multiplying by 4 to change this into a common denominator of 8. So 4 plus 7 is 11, and the denominator stays the same. If you change this back into a mixed number, you're going to get 1 3/8. So technically this is a negative, and this one's also a negative because there were negative signs. So now we're doing -11 plus a -1, which is -12 3/8. This is the same problem I showed you at the very beginning, except for it's 7th grade level, and now it has negatives. So just a reminder as to what I showed you before, and you would get a final answer of -12 3/8. This is more complicated than the traditional method needs to be, but it is one way to solve this problem. And that's it.